I started studying music when I was 6, so I studied the piano, and then by the time I was 12, I decided I wanted to become a composer. I realized that at that time, you had a choice. Either you taught music or you starved if you wanted to become a composer, and I had no inclinations for either. And I'd always loved theater and drama, and motion pictures seemed a marvelous way of combining the two.
What would you say was the main difference between composing in TV and composing in film?
The time difference is the main problem. In television, we're always under this constant time pressure. I marvel at what composers can do in a short period of time. Every week, the show has got to be produced and ready for the air. And many times there will be as much music in our television show as there will be in a feature. In the feature, I can have as much as 5, 6, 7, 8 weeks to write that same amount of music. Whereas in television, I would only have 5 days to write it, at the most.
And presumably, when you come to a film, you'll have all the facilities you need. You can have as large an orchestra as you like.
Well, within reason, I must say. We do have budget limitations in films also. There's naturally a smaller budget for music and television than there is in a feature, where you spend $200,000 for an episode of a show as opposed to, say, $2 million, unless there's going to be more money for features. But we don't have quite the unlimited resources that the orchestra would like to have.
Were the resources unlimited when you wrote the score for Lilies of the Field?
Oh, the resources were really limited in that film. We all did that picture for practically nothing. There was no money available in this picture. The producer scraped up $200,000. I think he got the last $25,000 by hawking his house and everything else. And it was really could be a disaster if he had gone for like 10 minutes over on shooting. Well, he would have lost everything that he owned. And so consequently everyone more or less donated their services for very small sums of money. It was very nice for the star and the writer and the director because they all worked on a percentage basis. I worked on a friendship basis, and I loved the picture. That's why I did it.
Well, it certainly shows in your music. Jerry, at what stage do you come into the picture? Are you with the director and the producer right from the word go?
Usually I come in after the picture is made.
Now, how do you work? Do you like to be left alone, or, I mean, if a producer says to you, "Oh, we'd like a bit of harp music there," what's your reaction?
I freeze. I like to discuss the dramatic aspects of the film with the producer or the director. I feel that I'm being paid for my knowledge and talent, which I think is incredibly more than theirs as far as music is concerned. And when it comes to them telling what instruments to use, I don't think that they have the qualifications to do so. So I listen and laugh it off.
Well, what sort of brief were you given when you came to do the score for Blue Max?
Here was a case where there was a request for a large orchestra. And I had 100 men on that picture, which was fun. That was a ball.
And you used all 100 in the battle sequences?
Yes, it sounds like that.
You see, that's an entirely different sort of battle picks up to right there.
Well, yes, the style of music was different. The style of orchestra was different. I was trying to use a few primitive instruments too. I used such things as conch shells and ram's horns and rocks.
You didn't decide to use electronic instruments?
No, I use no electronic music at all in that score, which many people don't believe, but it happens to be the truth. The only unorthodox things were the percussion instruments, which I used strange instruments such as stainless steel mixing bowls and all other such things. But I did not want to use anything electronic. It was the obvious thing to do. The only electronic device, I must say, is in the main title. But that's the only electronic device in the entire score.
Scores. In your latest picture, 100 Rifles, you've got Raquel Welch starring. Do you find her an inspiration when you're writing music?
Well, no. I mean, inspiration is, just a word for the poets, really. I don't really look at her as Raquel Welch or anything else. I look at her as a character that she's playing. In 100 Rifles, she plays a very interesting character. An Indian woman. I think she does it very well. And I was really much more turned on by the whole ethnic aspect of the Indians and the Mexicans in this picture than, I must say, her personal charms alone. I had the combination of the Mexican mariachi rhythms, which are terribly exciting, plus I used two authentic Yaqui Indian melodies and wove it all together, and it was fun to do.
Thank you. You got the Oscar for The Omen. While we were just listening to that, you said that was nominated as one of the best film songs as well.
Yes, it was one of the 5 that year, which was a great thrill because it was not a song that was used as a promotion for the motion picture. As I said, it didn't make the charts, but it was integrated within the film.
It was actually part of the storyline rather than just behind the titles.
Right.
Which seems more and more these days with film music, that people are setting out to write a hit song to go in with the film, to jump on the bandwagon.
Well, actually, they're making soundtracks. I mean, they're making motion pictures of soundtracks. It used to be where they make motion pictures from books and from plays. Now they make them from soundtrack albums.
Yeah, we've had the film of the record for the first time last year in Convoy, so I don't know what's going to be next. It's Friday.
I think it's one of those crazes that has worked very successfully a couple of times, and we'll see what happens.
But, I mean, you've been writing for the cinema now for some time, steady being diplomatic. You've done over 70 scores for different films I've been able to trace.
It's more than that now, I think. It's closer to 100.
The last one I saw with a Goldsmith score was the first Great Train Robbery, which is a caper movie. It's a fun movie.
It really is a fun movie in Victorian times, and I really don't know when the last picture was made in that period that was fun, that people could go have a real giggle, have some excitement, and no violence.
Because you've also got 2 coming up, Boys from Brazil and Magic.
Yes.
Which are totally different.
Yes, they are.
Boys from Brazil about, as somebody earlier on the program was saying, there seems to be an awful lot of very old Nazis around these days. And Magic, which is a supernatural film. So you've covered virtually every kind of movie musically.
In my career, I think I have. I think that there's little that I haven't done.
But how do you go about, do you start from the finished answer print, do you start by seeing the film, or do you get involved earlier in the production stages?
I work with the final cut of the film. There's no dialogue. The dialogue is very rough. There's no sound effects per se, but it is and should be cut to time. And that's the condition I get the film in.
Do you find yourself changing your writing style to fit a feel of a film, or do you find that the style of the music affects that feel of the film when you see the final print?
I think it's a good question, because one wants to have their own identity creatively. And if, say, you mentioned the last 3 films that Boys from Brazil, Magic, and The Great Train Robbery, where you're dealing one picture, Boys from Brazil is done with Ersatz Wagner and Richard Strauss, but in the grandest manner. Magic was, it's not really a supernatural, it's really a melodrama. Very psychological, but a very bittersweet love story also. So it's a totally different, very intimate kind of music, from one very broad to very intimate. And then Great Train Robbery, which is a Victorian, it's a great romp, and it's fun, and it's happy, and it's fun. So you have all these different styles dramatically, and to keep a compositional style that is the same in all of them is really quite impossible.
You must almost get to be a schizophrenic composer.
You really do, and somehow you want your own identity, and I think maybe the identity comes more in approach. We're going back to using much larger orchestras and more the symphonic style of writing, which suits me just fine. I've had it with with the Fender bass guitar and a drum set. I mean, I don't want to do anything. So we're going back to much more formal and really more classic kind of music. I like to think that no matter what I've done, that there's a certain mark or trademark that is my own.
Because one of the reasons you're in London is for the British Film Institute's season of Hollywood composers, where you were earlier this evening. But also, you've been writing for symphony orchestras now for nearly 10 years since you made... It will be 10 years this year since you made your debut as a symphony conductor, or symphonic conductor.
Well, I'd actually been writing much longer than that. I think that I had my first performance, it wasn't 10 years, it was 7 years ago, actually, in St. Louis.
I thought it was 69 with the Southern California Chamber
Oh, I
Orchestra.
beg your pardon. Oh, the chamber orchestra.
Okay,
So,
but
you're
a
right.
small band. A small
My
band.
God, that was 10 years ago. I forgot about that. Yes, there was a cantata I wrote with Ray Bradbury.
Ray Bradbury, the science fiction writer.
Yes, he did a science fiction Christmas piece called Christus Apollo, and based on Christ in outer space. And I did the music for it.
Mhm.
It was a great deal of fun.
And you conducted the Royal Philharmonic
Yes,
for the Film Harmonic
Yes.
concerts not so long ago. Where do you see your career going from here, Joe?
I really enjoy writing for films. I don't want to see my name in every film because we'd all get sick of it. I would like to perhaps do fewer films, and I would like to. I do enjoy conducting. I like in front of a large audience. It's a great thrill to turn around and see all those people, and it's also a great thrill to have the music being made right then and there. And if there's something is wrong, that you can't go back and do it again. But that kind of spontaneity is something you can never get in a recording studio.
Yeah, I understand
And
what you mean.
There's a certain excitement that I find being generated from the audience, and if an audience is terrific, it's passed on to you. And if they're not so terrific, then you had best try and make them so.
You're fighting that.
But we'll see what happens in the future. I mean, I'm very fortunate. I'm doing what I want to do. I've always wanted to do. And we are allowed to experiment a great deal in motion picture music. We have some of the greatest musicians in the world playing it. And we're very lucky.
You're a happy man, I hope, and a lucky man.
Do I enjoy it?
Jerry, welcome back. Enjoy your stay.
Thank
You're
you.
working on a film here in Britain at the moment.
Yes, The Alien.
Another science fiction movie.
Yes,
And then Star Trek at the end of the year.
yes.
That's the one I'm waiting for. That's the one I'm waiting for.
Thank you, Jerry.
Good morning.
And Jerry, first of all, what brings you to Britain?
I'm going to record the score for a new film for Walt Disney called Night Crossing. The story of the two families who escaped from East Berlin to West Berlin in a hot air balloon. I believe it was 2 or 3 years ago.
Now, what stage is this particular film in at the moment? I mean, obviously, if you're here, it must be fairly near completion.
It's completed except for the music and the final dubbing.
So what does that mean for you? Do you work with those moviolas, the things that you wind
Yes,
around?
all those machines and those gadgets and all those things. Once the film must be completed and cut to time because the music is scored to the split second, so therefore it is considerably and safely to say locked in.
So, you're going to start. So how do you start?
I'm going to start recording the music. I've been writing the
Oh,
music.
you've written it already?
It's all written.
So you'd seen the film?
Oh, yes.
So, all right, let's say what happens when you first see the film. What happens? Are you with the director at that time?
Yes, I'm with... Well, normally, I first of all read a script.
Yeah.
Before the film is made, and I'm asked if I would like to do the film, and I happen to like the script very much, and I said, yes, I'd love to do it. And then a year later, the film is finished, and I go to see it, usually being the first one outside of the director and the producer to have seen the film, which already puts me in a very unique position. I'm the sounding board. I think that for a very brief period of time, I'm not looked upon as a composer, but as an audience, because I am the first one outside to have seen the finished film, even before the executives have seen it. So I'm a sounding board. What do I think of this and what do I think of that? And eventually we get around to the topic of why I'm there, the music. And then we screen the film several times together, decide where we want music and what we would like it to do, emotionally, to highlight. And then we decide the places, the sections that will have music, and I go home and write it.
As a composer, do you want the music to stand out, or do you feel it should just complement the film?
Oh, I think it should stand out. I think, I've been asked this question many times. I think that as one says, especially today when visually films are so exciting, I mean, one will sit and look at a film and see some awesome shot of the sky and the sun and say, oh, is that a gorgeous shot? And I think that by the same token that one should say, oh, what a stunning piece of music, and how it lifts me beyond what I'm seeing into an emotional plane that hopefully the actors are in.
How does the function of somebody like yourself, who scores for film, differ from that of the old silent movie piano player?
I think we're a much more specific area. I think that we're dealing with much more cerebral issues. I think we're dealing with more intense emotional issues with the old, the do-it-yourself piano players. it was a night of filling in the void. I mean, there was no sound. I think the perfect example, it was many years ago when I first started in the industry. I started doing dramatic music for dramatic radio shows in the 50s, and then I graduated to the infant field of live television. And it was a catch-as-catch-can-be process. I mean, every week we would go on the shift air with an hour-and-a-half live dramatic program, and there wasn't a great deal of time to prepare. And after several run-throughs and prior to going on the air, there were these numerous changes. And I remember once the producer saying, "We must have some music in this section." And I said, "But there's no necessity." He says, "I don't care. I want music." I argued, "But why?" He says, "Look, I don't care if it's a Star-Spangled Banner. I want music there because we got to cover up the cable noise." So there is the extreme. I mean, and that really, I think, relates back to the old piano players or the old, whatever it was in the silent movies. Just something to fill in silence. Silence seemed to be the most feared thing of all producers and directors.
That was a television series with the unlikely name of Climax.
That's right. It started in 1955. Hollywood. Television answered to Hollywood.
Well, getting back to Hollywood and films as opposed to TV, have you ever written for a film that you actually loathed?
Yes, I must say I have. One is no, but
I mean, in spite of the fact that you read a script, don't you? You've already established that. You read the script, and obviously the film didn't turn out to be as good as the script.
Yeah, what happens is somehow film is a very visual medium, and I think I always complain that I have a terrible time. People do terrible things to my creative efforts and all, but I think the writer has the worst of anyone in the motion picture industry. And what happens when you read the written page and what happens to what is eventually transcribed to the screen can be a totally shocking affair. I sometimes related to getting into an elevator and preparing yourself to ascend, and you push the wrong button and you drop down, and that's a terrible feeling. And that's what happens sometimes with me when I read a script, and I say, "Oh, this is quite exciting, quite marvelous," and I've committed myself to it, and I see the first cut, and I'm absolutely astounded, but I'm stuck.
You've got to do it.
So I've got to do it.
Right. Do you think that enough importance is attached to your role?
I have found that over the years that there's a great interest in the public in the music for films, and I think that occasionally certain music comes out of motion pictures, which attracts more attention to us. There's more attention in the concert field now. A great number of concerts are devoted to film music, and it isn't sort of the naughty people who are just out to make a buck, but we are artists. We're tremendous craftsmen, and to me, I mean, I love what I do.
Do you think, in fact, that... I'm sorry, Sarah, would you like to say
No,
something?
I was just going to say, you've worked with enormous numbers of directors. Are some directors more musically literate than others? Do some give you more help or less?
Absolutely. I think that also the familiarity is a great thing. I mean, as you said, I've worked with many directors. I've gone through 3 eras of directors, the so-called directors from the Golden Age, then the many directors that I made my first associations with in live television, Frankenheimer, Schaffner, George Roy Hill, Bob Mulligan, and so on and so forth, that group. And now I'm involved with the new young group of directors.
Do you find that fashions have changed? Because I've just seen this Ultimate Adventure, Raiders of the Lost Ark, and found that there was so much music in it that I was dying for a bit of silence.
Yeah, well, Steven Spielberg is very... I'm going to do a film for him in November, strangely enough, called Poltergeist.
Now, Russell, take a bow.
And so I had to giggle when you were talking about that, because we have a better solution than they do out there.
Do you think, in fact, a good score can save a bad film, or, can that happen? I mean,
I must say, I've been often quoted at that as I always say that a good picture will save a bad score. I don't think that if a picture is great shortcomings, I think good music can help it, but it's not going to save it.
Mind you, the good music can still come through, can't it? And last. I can think of several.
Unfortunately, I think that on a film that is not quite so successful, they will push everything else to try and detract from the film. And usually the music is pushed to the extent of ad nauseum, which does not do the composer too much.
Is there ever a point when you say to a director, I think you should have silence there rather than music?
Absolutely.
Then he says, but the cable noises.
No, I must say that I've had my most success. I mean, it seems that the most successful films from both standpoint of the commercial success of the film and my own recognition have been the films with the least amount of music.
I was going to say, I think Chinatown is a brilliant film in its use of music, and I don't actually, I'm sorry, remember the music, except that I know it added to the atmosphere tremendously.
You've hurt him very much there,
don't
Sarah.
remember the music.
Oh, my God.
I got up at 8 o'clock just That's all right.
What about, I mean, we were talking about television and writing for live television, which you did obviously in the early 50s, or the mid-50s up to, I think.
Yeah.
But television today, generally speaking in America, is on film. Does that make a lot of difference? I mean, is it a time factor, perhaps, with that?
Well, it can be if one is doing episodic television. I rarely do television now. I did this series, I don't think it's come over here yet, Masada, which was 8 hours of television. I think it was released here.
We've seen it as a movie
which
here,
is
yes.
dreadful. I mean, I'm really sorry they did that. But the actual television show itself was superb. And to me, it was, I worked on it as a feature motion picture.
But there's basically no difference, is there? Or is
in a program like that, no, because it was shot with a tremendous scope as a theatrical film. I think that television has been badly misused. I think that you use it very well in this country as a special. It's a medium that's in between theater and motion pictures, as far as I'm concerned. It has that.
When the music of our age is sort of distilled out by history, are there masterpieces of film music that really will return to the concert hall, as it were, and prove to be the real music of our time?
I think absolutely. I think that, what we do is really no different than Mozart was doing. He was trying to hack out a living like we all do.
Except he did it at 9.
But he was through by the time he was 32, I think.
Are there any that you can point to? I mean...
Well, I think that the obvious ones at the present time are the scores of William Walton, to Vaughan Williams, the Antarctica Symphony. They go to the music of Prokofiev, and those are quite music of Copland.
Bernstein, too. Yeah.
Well, Bernstein really only did On the Waterfront, which has not really become a concert piece yet, not established as a concert piece. But you do have, as I said, the Red Pony by Copland, the music from Our Town, and certainly the Eisenstein films that Prokofiev did. I'm not going to be so pretentious to say what the present group, is doing now, but I think that out of this mishmash, something will come.
One final question for you. Out of everything you've written, do you have a favorite piece?
The one I hope to write.
Well, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
That was Jerry Goldsmith.
Jerry Goldsmith, welcome to Round Midnight. That particular score there sounded like you had some pretty substantial resources, a sizable orchestra.
98.
98. It's not music, and I hope you would be the first to agree, that doesn't necessarily say Jerry Goldsmith, but it very definitely says movies, doesn't it? What is that quality that makes it so obviously film music?
I think it's more English than it is Hollywood. I think that somehow the style of the heraldic fanfares and brass is more an English tradition than it is in a Hollywood tradition, which is really an advent of maybe the last 10 years, I think, since the success of Star Wars.
Yes. There again, I suppose a space feature would almost automatically suggest to some writers electronic music, wouldn't it? Which that was far from being, and you opted for...
Well, there was I used a lot of electronics in the score itself. That particular piece was the main title, and it's sort of straight ahead.
Heroic.
Yes, heroic.
I'd like you to tell us a little bit, if you would, about your early writing career in television. You were with, was it CBS, I think, initially, for quite a long time.
Actually, from 1953 to 1960. Actually, I started in radio.
I was just going to say, that forgotten animal these days, a composer for live radio.
Live radio. Well, it was sort of the dying days of radio.
Yes.
It was the dying days of radio and the birth of live television.
So low-budget radio, obviously.
A sustaining radio, as we call it in America. I know that this is all subsidized here, but we had commercial radio drama. But we had a lot of sustaining shows that the network had to fill time with, and that's what I was doing.
When you moved to television, though, you've previously told to me horrendous stories of, first of all, the amount of music you were required to write in 1 week, but not only that, week after week after week?
Well, I started in live television, and I mean live television. What we did went on the air.
You performed live?
We did everything live. There was no going back for retakes or anything. The way we did it on the West Coast, because this was done in Los Angeles, we had to go on the air 3 hours earlier because it was broadcast to the East Coast, which is 3 hours ahead of us. So we would do that, and then we would sit around and they would prepare what they call a hot kinescope, which they made a 16 millimeter film print of the show as it went on the air. Then they would take the negative and give it to some guy on a motorcycle, and he would race to the labs and get it developed quickly, and then they would bring it in wet, and it would be broadcast locally.
But your musicians were probably, in many cases, virtually sight reading, something you'd just written, weren't they? Almost.
Well, many times in between dress rehearsal and going on the air, the producer, the director said, "We want some more music here, and fix this or change that." And I was writing it, and a copyist was copying it out. And yes, there was no time to sight read it. I mean, to rehearse it, we just rehearsed it on the air.
To remind you and our listeners of your television days, here's the theme from Dr. Kildare. Dr. Kildare, those television series from so many years ago. With me in the studio, the man who wrote that tune, Jerry Goldsmith. Am I not right, Jerry, in having the impression that it was a tune that you'd used a couple of times before?
No, I wrote that.
You wrote it specifically for Kildare. Have you ever...
Well, I must say that the introduction with the French horns and the pyramid effect was... Originally, I did it on a live television show called Studio One, which was instantly forgotten. And then when I did the pilot for the Dr. Kildare, it came to mind. I said, I might as well use it. I mean,
exactly.
And then the actual melody, the theme, that was new.
Well, we've heard of many a successful songwriter with his song trunk, where he
well, I don't have a song trunk.
I wondered, you don't have that sort of backlog of stuff that didn't work first time round. Okay.
No, usually if it doesn't work the first time, there's a good reason why it doesn't work the first time.
I expect you're right there. Now, you must have been glad, nevertheless, whatever you'd learned, to leave those high-pressure days behind you, weren't you, to move over into feature films where you've a little bit more time to work?
Not really.
No?
It's all relative. I mean, the whole process of television, one gets into a routine of doing it. I think that we were perhaps different. We were younger and adventurous, and time didn't really mean anything. Sleep didn't mean anything, and I was just happy to have a job doing what I wanted to do.
Yes.
And the pressure, the short time thing didn't really mean that much to me.
What was it, or who was it, that took you from television scoring to full-length feature movies?
Well, I started to make a reputation in television, and Alfred Newman actually took a fancy to what I was doing, and I didn't really know him, and he had never met me, but he was sort of behind my back promoting me, and he had just departed Fox as head of the music department, and it got back to me that he had said that if he was still at 20th Century Fox, he would immediately put me under contract. He thought I was that gifted. And then I had done a few, I think 2 or 3 small features that were up to that point, but then just on his own, he promoted me and pushed me to do Lonely or the Brave at Universal, which was, say, my first major picture. And that's when I first met him. And he was always, a real booster of mine and pushed me. And he had really nothing to do with the hierarchy at the studio, but he knew enough people, and they listened to him, and they took a chance on me. And that really was sort of the major change in my career, I guess, in 1961.
When you're writing for movies, how much or how little do directors take a hand in what you're doing?
I think the more feedback you get from a director, the better off you're going to be. I mean, it's he has a distinct point of view about what the picture is about, what he had intended it to be. I mean, one would think that I, as a composer, coming in, and it's my attitude, I come in to see a film and I want to be like the audience. I mean, the director's not going to be there to tell an audience how to react to his picture. And I think that since I'm really the first outsider to see a film, I'm more of a sounding board. The first encounter with the directors. Well, did you like this? Did you like this? Did you feel this? Or how did did I get the message of the picture? And one sort of feels, am I being an idiot by not getting it? But then on the other hand, if I'm just paying, the $5 and sitting there eating popcorn, I don't have to pass.
Is there any director with whom you've worked whom you consider more musically skilled than others, perhaps, who's almost a colleague in terms of suggesting ideas?
It's not a matter of a director suggesting ideas. It's a matter of an exchange of thoughts dramatically. I think that you can't really... I mean, music is impossible to verbalize. I mean, two composers can sit and talk, and you can talk a wonderful piece of music, what you may hear in your head, and that idea is not going to get across to your colleagues. So when you're dealing with a non-musical person, which most directors are, it becomes even more difficult. So I really try to keep it in terms of drama, I think.
But is it not true that, I was thinking particularly of Boys from Brazil, did not the director say to you, think 3/4, led you into Viennese and waltzes and so on?
But that's true. Frank Schaffner was a director, and we've done, I guess now we've done it in 7, I just finished a picture from Lionheart, which is the 7th or 8th film, plus the years in television we worked together. And we worked together for over 25 years, and so there's not a lot that has to be said. And in the case of Boys from Brazil, his only advice was think 3/4, and he's very good with one-liners, and he was very subtle. And I kept thinking, what was he saying? He's absolutely right. I did the whole picture. This is sort of a gigantic waltz score, and for Mengele, I did a German waltz, and for Lieberman, I did a Viennese-style waltz. It was all totally eclectic. I mean, it was really fun to see if I could write in the style of Wagner, Mahler, and Strauss, which I seem to have done.
Certainly a surprising but tremendously effective score. Is it something that you always wanted to do? Did you want to be a composer before you even thought of being a film composer, Jerry?
Oh, originally I wanted to be a pianist. I wanted to be a concert pianist, but I quickly got over that by the time I was 12, realizing I was never going to make that my career. And I was always composing, and I wanted to be a composer, and I decided music was going to be my life. And I was always very much interested in drama and theater, and the two seemed to go so hand in hand. And yes, I decided I wanted to write music for films.
How do you feel about the not almost entirely working to a deadline? A movie director hires you to write the music for his film. You then, as it were, compelled to do it. You can't wait around for inspiration particularly, can you?
No, and that's what's wonderful about it. I think that there's a certain snobism that goes between the concert world and, say, the world of the composer and film. And I think a lot of it is unjustified. I think that certainly there's a lot of inferior music that's written for films, but I think there's a lot of inferior music written for the concert hall, too. And I think that the idea of sitting around waiting for the muse to strike is sort of silly. I mean, Stravinsky was wonderful. He was disciplined. He knew that he was going to put in so many hours every day, and he would be disciplining himself. And whether he wrote, 1 bar or 2 bars of music a day, it made no difference. But he would do it every day, and it was a matter of he would start at a certain time and end at a certain time. Unfortunately, we work a little differently. It's not a matter of 1 or 2 bars I must do a day. I must do at least 2 minutes of music a day to make the so-called deadline. And it's very interesting to watch the creative process happen. Everything can't be totally inspired, but I've never ceased to be amazed at what can happen with, whether it be desperation or time or technique or what. But I think that after a while, a certain creative force takes over, and the music gets done.
Do you still find that the visual image, nevertheless, is in itself a spur to creative ideas for you?
Yeah, I find it much, a great help. I mean, look, there are certain composers that were really wedded to a text. I mean, Hugo Wolf's greatest things are really his songs, his lieder. And Wagner, aside from Siegfried Idle. I mean, it was the opera, or the songs for orchestra. But they may be crutches. I don't know. I mean, but it certainly is a lot. To have a program to write to is easier than saying, I'm going to sit down and write my third symphony.
Yes, I imagine.
And perhaps that was, a tradition of the classical school.
It's interesting, it seems to me, that the vehicle which gave you, you've been nominated for Oscar Awards, for Academy Awards many, many times, but for the vehicle that gave you the award eventually was a fairly bizarre one, wasn't it?
Yes.
To say the least. Well, let's remind everybody of Omen. Omen. I think it was fair to play that particular side of the music because there was quite a lot of choral.
Well, most of the score was done with.
Sure. What was your overriding thought about that? Why did you opt for that particular form?
It was a slip of the tongue. Many times a producer or director will say to you long before, in this case, before the picture was shot, well, what do you envision for the music? And it was just sort of stupid because I can't really say what I'm going to do musically until I see the picture, because the visual is so imperative for me. I mean,
yes.
A script goes through such a metamorphosis when it's in the hands of the director. It comes from the printed page to the visual. In this case, I just said casually, I think I hear voices. And 6 months later, the producer said to me, boy, that was a great idea of yours to use voices. We could hardly wait to hear it. I said, oh my God, what have I done to myself? And I was very fortunate. The main problem was, what am I going to have the voices do? I mean, they can't hum and ooh and ah for an hour of music. And there has to be some kind of a text. And I was very fortunate that the choral group were the Ambrosian Singers, and I called the director, John McCarthy, and I asked him, give me a couple of words in Latin for the Antichrist. And he came up with Ave Satani, and then he gave me about 4 other words. And I hadn't written any music for chorus in Latin since my college days, and I all of a sudden rediscovered the joy of manipulating Latin words, because you can change the accents in any syllable. I mean, in any word, you put the accent wherever it makes music for me. I mean, it was really incredible, and I had no idea what the words meant. I sort of arranged them in some kind of logical order that he gave me, and with a few words, I based the whole score on it. And some of it was a phrase out of the mass, and the traditional mass. And the strange thing is, besides getting nominated and winning the award for the score, I also got nominated for best song.
And you won that too?
No, I lost that.
Oh.
I never expected it. It was one of the great gags of all time, for music and lyrics also. But it was, and subsequently I did 2 more of those pictures, and it became a great deal of fun working with the Latin texts, and each time it became rather amazing how the words sort of made the music happen.
Yeah. And
you can take one word and you can say it over and over again, and the music just keeps flowing. And
that's tremendous. Joy doing public performance, concert performances.
Very much.
Excerpts from your music.
I think one of the reasons is that you, for a composer, you spend a great deal of time writing music, and even whether you're writing a piece for the concert hall or whether you're writing for film, one could finish a piece for the concert hall, not hear it for 2 or 3 years, and you do a film and you record the score and you get reaction from the producer and the director and a few other people, and the public may not see the film for another 6 months, and you don't get any kind of immediate feedback. One thing about doing a concert is it's like maybe the days of live television. You go out and do it, and you immediately get a response from the audience. You feel a contact, a relationship with the listeners, the people that you're making music for, good, bad, or indifferent. You can't go back and do it over again. And there's that kind of excitement and the gratification of feeling a response from the audience. I mean, I can walk on the stage and I know that this is audience is with it tonight, or it's not with it tonight, or they're for me, or they're against me, or maybe it's sounding paranoid on my part, I don't think so, but you could walk in front of the same couple of thousand people, 5 nights in a row and get a different reading.
Yes, I believe it.
And that's sort of exciting, that part of it. And if you can manipulate the people with your performance into, say, the negative vibrations I'm getting them to being positive, then that's great. And it's generally, music is meant to be made and to be performed and to be heard.
To be enjoyed, yes.
Not with records or all the
film
mechanical.
soundtracks.
Yeah.
All right. I know your concert on the 10th with the Philharmonia will end with the music that we're going to conclude with ourselves tonight. You've got a sweet hymn you call The Generals. It scores from 2 films, really, isn't it?
Yeah, I did. Is a sort of a masochistic move. I agreed to do the film MacArthur after doing Patton, which is sort of a tough act to follow, not necessarily musically, but dramatically, because Patton was such a wonderful film, and unfortunately MacArthur didn't come anywhere near it as a piece of film. But I liked the march very much from MacArthur. It's so totally different than Patton, and they were 2 rather interesting men, and so I put the 2 of them together into a little short suite, and I call it The Generals. And
sure, it'll be an enormously popular concert. Jerry Goldsmith, a great pleasure to meet you. Thank you for being with us. We're going to draw a veil over MacArthur and play the march from Patton.
The theme from Star Trek, the motion picture, which introduces our special guest tonight, who's across the table from me now, conducting merrily. He's one of the greatest of the Hollywood composers, a man who's been writing film and TV scores for over 30 years, Jerry Goldsmith. Welcome to the programme. You've just arrived, I know, from the States to prepare for a concert on Friday at the Barbican Hall, and also to be heard here on Radio 2. Give us an idea of what we're going to hear in the concert, if you will.
We're going to hear Star Trek, but that will be Star Trek 5, which I believe opens here either next month or the month after. Actually, the theme that you just heard was written for the first Star Trek motion picture, is now the theme for the new television series. I don't know if it's playing over here or not. So I'm starting the concert with that also.
And what else?
And we'll hear Chinatown and Papillon, Sand Pebbles, Patton, Under Fire, Alien.
Oh, look forward to hearing all that. At what stage of a film project do you become involved? I mean, I'm slightly awed by the thought of starting with a completely blank sheet of paper and a film script. What do you do?
So am I. So constant. Normally, I should come in when the film is in its final cut, which means that it's pretty much to time, and it's ready for me to see. There is no music need, naturally, to say. No sound effects to say, other than those naturally recorded, and some of the dialogue is even missing. So that's when I first see the film.
What do you do then? So you're at this rough cut stage. You've got the film with half its dialogue missing and no sound effects and all that. You see it through. Then what do you do? Do you sit there going, "Oh no, what am I going to do now?" Or...
Well, in essence, you could probably say that's true. I mean, depending on who the director is, the filmmaker is that I'm working with, we discuss in depth what I'm going to try to do musically. He's going to tell me what he is going for dramatically, what he expects the music to do to assist him dramatically and emotionally in the film. It depends. Music is a very difficult art form, the most difficult art form to verbalize. I mean, I as a composer, to talk to another composer and try to describe to him what I'm hearing in my mind is very awkward. I mean, how do you verbalize what you hear? I mean, I know many composers who can give you the most graphic, wonderful description of the music they're going to write. And you say, oh, my God, this is going to be absolutely a magnificent experience to hear this. And you hear it. And, I'm not very clever at that, so it's awkward. So I really must just talk with the director in terms of drama. And if a composer has difficulties expressing himself in music descriptions, imagine how a non-musical person is, which is usually the director. So as long as we keep it on dramatic terms, emotional terms, we can get a line of communication going. The more you've worked with one filmmaker, the easier it is.
Have you got a favorite?
Well, I had a favorite, and that was Franklin Schaffner, who just passed away 6 weeks ago. I did 7 films with him, and he was wonderful. He somehow, in very few words, can convey what he was feeling and what he hoped that I would feel. In other words, it really boils down to we both hope that we're both in the same wavelength, which we should be, because a film is a difficult thing to make. It's really a compilation of a lot of talents and egos, and the director must coordinate them all, soothe them all, and get the best creative output from them. And that's difficult. And a man like Schaffner was terrific at that.
I know another film you made with Schaffner was Patton.
Mm-hmm.
It's been the music for that widely acclaimed as possibly one of your best ever.
Yeah.
A short score as well, isn't it? It's only
about 35 minutes of music, yeah. We had very few... I just said to Frank that on that film, I felt that... I saw Patton as a three-dimensional character, that he had the belief in reincarnation. He was a warrior, and he was a religious man, and those were the three very strong basic... They were actually the basic makeup of his personality, and I felt that if I could capture those musically, each individually, thematically, and then put them all together, showing him as the total man, it would be an interesting way to go. And he immediately understood what I was saying, and agreed that would be an interesting way to score it, and that's what I did do. On one film, I'd written a theme for a film, and I played it for him. Well, the theme itself was quite pleasant. He felt it wasn't right for the film, and I naturally became very defensive about it. I mean, what does he know? And we sat and talked for hours and hours, and it was really getting very frustrating. And then he said something about just something like simplicity, innocence. And I think the word innocence triggered something. Oh, you mean something like this? And I went to the piano and played something. Yes, that's it. And you can have great reams of rhetoric, but one key word can trigger something. And that's me. That's how it works with me. And if a director is clever enough and patient enough, he can... Which he should be. That's what we get.
Go for music for the Omen.
Yes.
Was that a difficult score to write, particularly?
No, it wasn't. It was a lot of fun doing that picture. You know, I have to remind myself that when I did the Omen, I had never done anything like that. I mean, since I've done two more of the Omen since I did the whole trilogy. Trilogy, that makes it sound so impressive. The Omen trilogy. I did the film in England, and I called John McCarthy, who has the Ambrosian Singers, which we're going to be singing in the picture, and I asked him to give me some words from the Latin Mass, and then I asked him, what if we sort of turned this around and made it a little more satanic, and he gave me some words. And wonderful thing with Latin, you can put any two Latin words together, and it sounds great. It may not make any sense, but it sounds wonderful. But more important than that, it's so musical. The language is so musical that it sort of writes the music for you. So I put a few words together, Ave Satani, and things like that, and the music was sort of written automatically. And it became a great deal of fun to integrate choral and orchestral into a motion picture soundtrack, which I'd never done before. So that was a lot of fun. But there's one part of the Omen that I've never seen yet. I've always closed my eyes and looked the other way, the decapitation scene. So most of these films I can't watch. A lot of these films, I should say, a lot of these films I can't watch. I mean, they're too scary for me to see, and sometimes a little bit violent for me to see. But I really got intrigued with these kind of films because they allowed me this vast latitude of experimentation musically, and I could really do very interesting things in more of an avant-garde nature musically, and which was great fun for me, and became very experimental, and I could do things like that. I think that I got nailed into that category. It's so easy to typecast people in Hollywood. It seems that that's the way, not just in music, in anything. It's something I'm trying to change. I mean, I would like to remind people that I'd done films like Patch of Blue and Chinatown and Under Fire, and a picture in the States that was very successful called Hoosiers. Over here was called Best Shot. Didn't do very much because it was about basketball. But, the more the intimate films and the gentler films.
Something a little gentler and out of the horror vein. Chinatown, something completely different.
Yes.
How did that work?
Well, that was a very pleasant and quick experience. At least I wrote it in 10 days. For the audience to understand the time frame that I work in, it's anywhere from 6 to 10 weeks to a normal film to write the music and record it. But this was all done on Chinatown in 10 days because a score had originally been written for the film. They were not pleased with it and called me in very quickly to write a new score. I met with Roman Polanski, and we discussed very quickly what we wanted to do in the film.
I would imagine that Roman Polanski is probably a rather positive man about what he wants, isn't he?
Well, I only had one meeting with him, and then he was off to Spoleto to direct Lulu, so I didn't really have much contact with him. And he was really sort of... He had reached that point in the film, I think, where he'd spent so much time on it and gone through this whole process once with one composer that he was bored by now to have to do it with another composer. But he just basically went through it and told me what he felt and all that. And he's very articulate and a very knowledgeable, gifted man. And I immediately understood I felt what he wanted, and... I expressed what I felt, and we seemed to get on all right with that, and I went ahead and did it. Basically, I was very hungry for that kind of film to do. I mean, it's not a gentle film by any means, but it was an intimate film, and with great emotions and a lot of sensitivity in it. And it's part of that creative process. Don't ask me how it happened. It just happened. It just sort of flowed out. I think I was ready for that kind of film to do.
And have you got a favorite film score of all time?
I think that probably one of the greatest film scores ever written was Psycho by Bernard Herrmann. I think that I think you admire it as music, and I think you certainly can listen to it as music and say it's beautifully constructed, but integrated with the film. It was a magnificent accompaniment to the motion picture, and it worked in highlighting the drama.
As you say, it's not music you go away humming, but every time you hear it forevermore.
You know it.
You know it instantly.
And it did what it's supposed to do. It furthered the drama and emotionally pushed you as the audience over the edge.
Thanks very much for joining us.
My pleasure,
Jerry
Charles.
Goldsmith.
And that, to date, has been achieved by my first guest tonight, Jerry Goldsmith. Jerry, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure, Brian. I'm overwhelmed at those numbers.
I was just going to say, whenever you're confronted these days with a new brief, do you feel a bit intimidated by your own record?
Yes, it sometimes really does intimidate me. Did I do all that?
You sure did. But it makes you think...
A lot of it I'd like not to have done, I'll tell you that.
All right, here's a rotten question to someone who's flown in and feels a little tired. Do you think that music written specifically for the movies should have a life of its own?
Well, let's say good music that's written for movies should have a life of its own. But it's a matter of conjecture, what's good and what's not
sure,
good.
But I mean, it's written, isn't it, to complement a visual image. Without that image, isn't there something missing?
No, I don't think so. I would like not to think so. I think that, people listen to music and they make their own images up. Sometimes we help them by giving them a title, and that helps it. But one can make any image up they want to for a piece of music. And, of course, if they associate it with the film, they already have that preconceived image there for them. I think that, one can say, the Blue Danube Waltz, and you think of the beautiful brown Danube.
Right.
But you also think of something way out in space, too, because of 2001.
Yes.
So it depends. I think if it's a good piece of music, it will draw whatever images you want. I mean, not all music is good. I mean, I'm often asked the question, should you hear the music in a film? I mean, if it's doing its job, you shouldn't hear it. I think it's sort of nonsense. I think that it's like... should you be aware of a beautiful panoramic shot that the cinematographer's got? Of course you're aware of it.
It's a bit like saying, should you be able to smell a drink, isn't it? I mean, it's two different senses assessing the same thing, so that's...
I think that as long as it does not distract from the drama, but complements the drama and helps heighten your emotional relationship with the drama, then it's successful.
Fair enough. Jerry's here in London, well, for many things, but one of them is a concert on Friday at the Barbican, is it not? In the Summer Pops series, when you renew acquaintance with the London Symphony Orchestra.
This is my first time.
Is it? First time with them?
I never worked with
I thought you'd conducted every symphony orchestra in the world.
Well, almost, but not that. But there's so many orchestras in London, let alone England. I mean, you take a lifetime to get through them all.
Will this be a program of entirely your own compositions?
Yes, I modestly here say that unfortunately it's all my music, or fortunately, is the case.
Including any of the new material?
The newest is Star Trek V, The Final Frontier, which opens, I believe, September or October here in England. I'm not quite sure when.
Will you be playing anything from that?
Yes, I opened the program with that.
So despite the fact that it is a futuristic space movie, you were still able to use traditional resources for the music. You're not stuck with synthesizers and hooked on.
Well, I never feel stuck with
Don't you?
synthesizers. I quite fancy them myself.
Really?
Oh, yes, I'm very much involved in electronic.
Will you be using them on Friday?
No. I found doing concerts with electronics has really never worked out too well.
No.
When you do a pop concert, you're really not given a great deal of rehearsal time. And the electronics do take a bit extra rehearsal time to balance them with the orchestra. So everything in the concert is rewritten just for the traditional orchestra.
So it will be different from the music as played in the movie?
Basically, it's the same, just minus the electronics.
Okay.
I'm not being...
That's all right, that's fair enough. What else have you included in that particular program for Friday?
There's music from Chinatown and Patton and Papillon, and I have to remember I've changed this program so from what I normally do.
Can you remember what is perhaps the oldest piece in terms of when it was composed?
The oldest piece, the theme from Dr. Kildare.
Really?
So that's older than me.
Wow.
This is a medley of television themes.
Yes.
That was a big hit song.
Oh, it was, yes.
Richard Chamberlain. That was my hit, a medley of my hit.
All right, here's another of your hits.
Oh, Rambo I'm doing also, yes.
Yeah? I wonder if you're doing this one. Probably not, actually, in view of the resources involved. Your Oscar Award winner from The Omen.
I'm not doing that because that requires a chorus.
Well, we'll let people listen to it now. Was there ever a danger, Jay, that you would be typecast as a composer?
Yeah, I think that's very typical of Hollywood.
Yes.
Everybody is put into or pigeonholed. We're all categorized. Yes, I got, for some strange reason, I think that I got typecast to doing the big supernatural films.
Yes.
And a lot of horror, scary films that that I can't even particularly watch myself. I mean, there are scenes, the decapitation scene in any Omen I've never seen. I always close my eyes on that one.
Have you often used vocal resources on that scale?
Well, all the Omen trilogy, if you may say.
Yeah.
That was all voices.
Why did you opt for voices there?
It's a strange story. I very rarely will express an opinion about what I'm going to do in a film until I've seen it. But for some reason, after I read the script in The Omen, I remember we were driving out to Shepherd. I was driving out with the producer. And he said, "What do you hear in the music?" I love that question. What do I hear? I'm blank right now. You mustn't give that impression. I hear something. I hear voices. Oh, I love that idea. So I let it ride at that. And 6 months later, when I came back here to do the score, he said, "I love that idea of voices." So I said, "Voices? Uh-oh." So I was sort of stuck with that concept. And then I really sat down to start working. I said, what am I going to have the voices do? I can't have them go ooh and ah for an hour's worth of music. And then I got the idea about using the mass, only turning it around.
Yes.
And then I got some Latin words from John McCarthy, who leads the Ambrosian Singers here, my Latin assistant here, so to speak. And I sort of strung them together. And not only did I win an Academy Award for the score of The Omen, but I got nominated for Best Song, Lyrics and Music.
Yes, I bet it didn't make the hit parade.
Unfortunately, or fortunately, I did lose that one. It was very funny. Backstage, there's a big to-do afterwards, after you win your award, and then you go backstage, and the press is back there interviewing you. And I said, wait, I want to hear myself lose, because they were going to announce the best song. And it was Evergreen, which is a lovely song.
Absolutely. It takes us back to Streisand, does it?
Yes, it does. There's a way of working around to that.
Right. Now, you're not only here for the concert on Friday. You're making an album, are you?
Yes. There seems to be a growing number of film music collectors throughout the world. And a few record companies have been after me to re-record or some scores of mine that have never been released on albums.
Such as?
Well, such as what I'm doing this week is a Western that I did back in the 60s called Rio Conchos, but also on that album is something that I'm very, very fond of, is the music I wrote for the prologue of The Agony and the Ecstasy, which is an interesting story because when they finished the film, they realized that this was the story of Michelangelo, the painter, but basically he was not a painter, he was a sculptor, and they had no sculpture in the film, so they decided to put this 13-minute prologue onto the film. And the film's composer, Alex North, wasn't available, so I was engaged to do it. And it was a dream for a composer, because all you had was music and the sculpture of Michelangelo with a very minimal amount of narration. And I really quite liked the piece I wrote for that. And I decided I would do that as part of this record, and also I'm doing that as part of the concert on Friday. It makes quite a nice piece.
Which we should have mentioned. That concert is to be broadcast on radio too, is it not?
Yes, it is.
Fine. So when do you get to go back home?
Well, we'll leave London for either home or Italy, depending on my schedule.
Well, that's got to be nice either way.
Next Monday, I guess.
Jerry Goldsmith, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the show tonight. We haven't as yet got the new music for Star Trek, but I suppose it's a reworking of the original theme.
Well, the main theme is the same. There's also the theme for the new television show, Star Trek: The Next Generation.
Then we can listen to some of the music for Star Trek 1979.